to stay at home. In 1 minute, the ball will drop and you will see pandemonium.
In the year 2000, the world changed forever. People all over the world united in jubilation as the sun rose upon a new era, a new world, as the old paradigms collapsed to give way to a bright new tomorrow as the day they had been waiting for finally arrived. That's right, Urgai's God Bless the Ring was finally released worldwide. Urgai's is a fully 3D fighting game that depicts the epic, wrestling-inspired clashes between such memorable characters as Dasher Inaba, Hand-to-Hand, Kazuya Mishima, and Sasuke from Naruto. However, if you've heard of Urgai's before, those probably aren't the characters you expected me to name drop. No, instead, you probably expected me to say, Close! Yes, if Urgai's is known for anything, it's known for its whopping 6 guest characters from Final Fantasy VII, an entire third of its roster. Cloud is even on the front cover and is displayed with huge prominence on the back one. As far as the marketing is concerned, the cast of Urgai's might as well be supporting characters in their own game. It's sad, really. These characters just never got the appreciation or fandom they deserved. Rest in peace, Wolf Girl Joe? So, what FF7 guys made it in? Well, this is interesting because it both is and isn't who you might be expecting. Clyde and Tifa? No-brainers. Sephiroth? Well, he is the main villain of the game, from a certain point of view, although it could also be argued that Sephiroth is really more of an extension of Jenova rather than the defining villain, or even maybe an expression of Shinra's crimes against the planet. And hey, what about the others? What about Barrett Wallace, one of the first characters to appear in the game and one of the most prominent members of the party? Well, he's nowhere to be found, despite there being another guy with a gun arm in this game already, making a reskin totally possible. There's a character clearly referencing Red 13 in here, but the boy himself is conspicuously absent. Cid is thankfully nowhere to be found. Kachi? Nope. Aerith? One of the most important characters in the game and a huge part of the lasting legacy of FF7? Absolutely not. Instead, we have Yuffie, who, yeah, she's a decent pick if you need another girl, being at least more suited for the kind of game Urgai's is than Aerith, I guess. But then there's Vincent Valentine, an optional character in the truest sense of the word, having relational at best involvement in the narrative, and yet, not only did he manage to get a prestigious slot in the Urgai's roster over all these other characters, but he would even get his very own spin-off game, entirely off the back of his stunning good looks. But even this relative impact is dwarfed by the final guest character, Zack Fair. A character whose total screen time numbers under 5 minutes, where the majority of even that is totally optional and extremely easily missable. A character who, despite all of this, not only made it into the cast of Urgai's, but got a role in the movie, merchandise, an entire fandom pivoting around him, and, just like Vincent, an entire spin-off game to call his own. And unlike Vincent's, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII isn't a punchline. It's a deeply beloved game in the hearts of many. The game that really kicked off director Hajime Tabata's career, and even got a full remaster in 2022. And I only really have one question for it. Why is it so weird? Of the installments in the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, Crisis Core is usually considered the good one. Advent Children's cultural reputation has never really risen above certified dumbass boys' night classic. Dirge of Cerberus is a punchline to all but we most devoted Vincent Valentine stans. and before Crisis, allegedly existed at one point. So it follows then that I, an avowed compilation of Final Fantasy VII liker, sort of, would naturally like the one of these games that is actually good, right? Forgive me for speaking so directly, but in this instance, I feel it's necessary. I am not a Crisis Core liker. Contrary to popular consensus, it's actually my least favourite part of the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. On a given day, I might tell you that it's my least favourite Final Fantasy game. However, I wouldn't be making this video if I didn't think there wasn't something interesting about the game, something worth talking about. When I started making YouTube videos, I made a promise to myself that I would never make a video that was just vacuously shitting on something I didn't like. There are things to see in this game, things I appreciate about it. So, as negative as this video might seem, I am going somewhere with this. I promise.
When the war of the beasts bring about the world's end, the goddess descends from the sky. Wings of light and dark spread afar. She guides us to bliss, her gifts everlasting.
That's my hair!
Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII was originally released in 2007 on the PSP, and no matter the version you play today, it sure does feel like it was originally released in 2007 on the Sony PlayStation P. In fact, it might be the most 2007 PSP game ever made. That's not a criticism either. I adore how this game looks, especially on the aforementioned PSP. While I don't think you could pay me to actually replay the PSP version of this game, and thusly most of the footage I'm going to be using is of the 2022 remaster, aesthetically, my heart belongs completely to the 2007 Crisis Core, because my brain is fundamentally broken, and I spend my entire life wishing I could live inside Play Online. There's a clunky futurism to it all, with menus that look like someone extrapolating a futuristic phone interface that never reaches beyond the imagination of what would be possible on the Nokia N-Gage. The Reunion version alters a lot of these visuals to be more in line with some other game, and while functional, it just doesn't have the same soul. Frankly, it should be illegal for video game remakes to change iconic, characterful visuals into sleek, minimalist sludge. It's a shame to lose some of these aesthetic flourishes, but it's not that big of a deal. There's still way too much Axe body spray in Crisis Core's blood for the stench of 2007 to ever be truly wiped from it. From omnipresent flip phones to characters that look like they were made to be farm signatures first and people second, everything that makes the compilation of Final Fantasy VII such a delightfully guilty aesthetic pleasure is here, but there's an extra layer of affect added by the game's status as a PSP game. This was a console that was capable of outputting stuff that can often look comparable to PS2 games, but always within limitations that blur at the edges, constraints that you run right into, a convincing illusion but one that still shatters pretty quickly if you push against it with enough force. The PSP is a living compromise, an act of translation, the power of the PS2 in the palm of your hands and shrunk down to fit it. It's maybe not a surprise then that while Crisis Core's world is one that looks like a PS2 game, it's an extremely cramped one, constructed out of square boxes separated by walks-down corridors, sometimes very literally. There's definitely a certain charm to it, but it really isn't long before it outstays its welcome as a visual experience. See, it's not just that these are boxes and corridors, it's that you're going to be seeing these specific boxes and corridors a lot. Again and again and again, because the PSP-ness of Crisis Core extends far beyond the visuals and into the structure of the game itself, a structure that emphasizes the repetition of these already pretty dull environments. While Crisis Core does have a linear main story that will always point you in the direction you need to go to progress, said story doesn't have a leveling curve so much as a series of leveling stairs. Stairs that you can only make yourself strong enough to climb over by stopping the momentum of the main quest right in its tracks, heading to a save point, and taking part in the game's Monster Hunter-esque missions, of which there are literally hundreds, and all take place within the same environments, fighting the same enemies over and over and over again. It's like an entire grinding dimension that exists off to the side of the actual game, that you're obligated to visit if you don't want to hit a brick wall with the real game's difficulty. Now, in the context of this being a PSP game, the decision to do this makes some amount of sense. Portable games often structure play in such a way that fits smaller play sessions when you're on the train, at school, or are waiting for a World of Warcraft Burning Crusade update over dial-up internet. This is a huge part of the design of the Monster Hunter Freedom games that came to define the identity of the PSP, especially in Japan. But divorced from that context, playing Crisis Core the way most people are going to now, either on an emulator at their computer or as part of a new remake for PCs and home consoles, this decision suddenly loses that sense. Chances are, if you're playing Crisis Core now, you aren't loading up a quick mission to do when you're on the bus because you don't have time to play a full chapter. You're grinding them out at your desk or sofa while listening to an incredibly attractive video essayist because you've hit a vertical difficulty cliff in the actual game. These deeply dull and repetitive missions are not helped by the fact that, on PSP at least, this game plays like total shit. Even from someone like me, someone who is able to earnestly enjoy the combat of games like
The Bouncer.
Crisis Core's combat rhythms, or indeed the complete lack of them, stick out. Zack Fair, in sharp contrast to the lively, energetic character he is in cutscenes, is one stiff, slow, stodgy guy whose level of commitment to his moves is such that he practically marries them with every swing of his sword, every move coming out at such a pace that I feel like I'm connecting a dial-up modem with every press of the button. Unlike games like Peace Walker or Birth by Sleep, which maybe suffer divorce from their status as portable games, but were perfectly reasonable within that context, Crisis Core plays really badly, even for a PlayStation P game. I think I differ somewhat from a lot of my friends in this space in that I'm not really interested in comparing an action game's combat to argued universal metrics and merits. So let me be clear, I don't think Crisis Core's combat is bad because it's not Devil May Cry. A game's design is a series of decisions that produce an effect, and how good a game is in whether the effects produced by those decisions resonate with what the game is doing. What is Crisis Core saying by being so slow and sticky and paceless? By my estimation, nothing. After all, in the reunion version of the game, combat is made significantly faster, more responsive, reactive and pacey, and it only feels more coherent and cohesive with the rest of the work. This is the reason why I can't go back to the original version, despite my aesthetic preferences. And yet, despite this, even in the reunion version, I don't think I can call the combat of Crisis Core successful, because ultimately, Crisis Core's combat is not bad because it's slow, it's not bad because it's repetitive, it's bad because of the fucking slot machine.
Infinite in mystery is the gift of the goddess. We seek it thus and take it to the sky. Ripples form on the water's surface. The wandering soul knows no rest. Settle down, Zack the puppy.
The digital mind wave is the system that underpins combat in Crisis Core, and on every level, its existence is baffling. As you're wading through the treacle that is this game's combat, this simulated slot machine is ticking away in the corner, granting you random buffs depending on the numbers it lands on. And these aren't inconsequential buffs either. Infinite MP, infinite AP, even outright invincibility is on the table. These buffs can completely turn the tide of battle in a way that would make play revolve around the DMW, even if it didn't also tie leveling up to the slot machine. That's right, your ability to become stronger in Crisis Core is down to the whims of the fucking slots. Now, this isn't completely random. There is a hidden EXP counter that ensures you'll still be leveling up fairly regularly, but there's still an element of randomness to it, and your materia is also beholden to the whims of the slots. I've played this game for hours without getting a single level in an equipped piece of materia because the slots were just not on my side. The digital mind wave is a system that exists to, even when it may not be strictly true, make the player feel like every aspect of their growth and development is out of their hands, controlled by the vagaries of a slot machine. And I have to ask, why? No, stop, don't do that. Once again, if we look at game design as a series of decisions that produce an effect, what is the effect that these decisions are seeking? Zack is not a gambler. He has no relationship with the concept of luck or chance. I don't know if those words are even mentioned in the story. Nothing about this character resonates with his design, even remotely. When Final Fantasy previously gave a character slot machine mechanics, it was because they were gamblers. They were someone who literally viewed their life through the lens of gambling. Part of me wants to read this as showing that Zack's fate is out of his hands, that his life is dictated entirely by the ineffable whims of destiny and chance, but that doesn't even really work with the game either. Even at the point of the story where Zack is, if not working against Shinra, at least doing his own thing and not following someone else's orders, our experience of his perspective is still through the lens of the slot machine. And even if this was something the game was willing to meaningfully engage with, why is the frame in which the game explores Zack's lack of agency slot machines? It's almost cartoonishly dissonant, but not in a way that says anything or does anything. It's just there, like something completely shoved in, with no thought for what it means for the story, just because the creators liked patchy slots, and, well, that's exactly what happened. You know, after reading that, I just feel like kind of an idiot for even trying to give these guys the benefit of the doubt. The one element of the DMW that does feel resonant with the game and with Zack as a character is also maybe the worst part of it, kinesthetically. See, it's not just the numbers that are rolling. The game will also roll between the faces of people Zack has met, and matching 3 will have Zack perform a cutscene move based on that character. It's neat, it's flavourful, it works with the game narratively, and if you're playing the PSP version, it grinds the game to a complete halt on a constant basis to play the same unskippable animations over and over and over again, completely out of your control. Now, limit break and summon animations are a thing in Final Fantasy VII, and Final Fantasy as a whole, but those things are decisions. You choose to summon Bahamut, taking into account the large MP cost in exchange for his power and cool animation. A limit break represents a payoff for play, a reward for surviving damage and playing smart, and it remains something you have to opt into. The consequence of Crisis Core's decision to take these moves out of player control is that these things feel like irritating interruptions, killing the pace of every combat encounter, rather than meaningful rewards or tools to use. Reunion mitigates this somewhat by at least not forcing the animation on you, letting you activate them at your own leisure, but the way they exist entirely separately from the rest of the combat means they still feel more like interruptions than anything else. Maybe this would work great if Crisis Core was about the lack of control Zack has in the combat, but I don't think the narrative is nearly as interested in this theme as the mechanics. So it just lands with the force of a wet fart in a quiet room, over and over and over again. All of this is ultimately the thing that kills Crisis Core for me. Okay, so Dirge of Cerberus is not a particularly great third-person shooter, but you know, it's a halfway decent one. I can actually play that game without being stopped in my tracks every 20 seconds to play a round of Space Cadet 3D pinball. Crisis Core is a slow, stodgy, deeply repetitive action RPG that is not even particularly interested in letting you play it. It's almost like uncritically applying the aesthetics and design decisions of machines designed to produce addiction and siphoning money from you doesn't actually make for more compelling games. I hope the video game industry learns from this valuable lesson and doesn't trap us in a nightmare realm from which we can never escape. I do sincerely and earnestly respect the potential for this decision to take agency away from the player in the core gameplay, to have Zack's life be ruled by chance and fate in play, and I think this team's future work, namely Final Fantasy Type 0 and Final Fantasy XV, make use of decisions that produce emotions and interactions that are not traditionally fun in much more effective and resonant ways. It just doesn't work here. And it's because, at the end of the day, Crisis Core just isn't a good story.
My friend, the fates are cruel. There are no dreams. No honor remains. The arrow has left the bow of the goddess.
Pure drivel.
Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, originally released in 2007 for the PSP, is the story of Zack Fair, which... oh wait, no, hang on. That isn't quite right. Let me start over. Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, originally released in 2007 for the PSP, is a story where you play as Zack Fair. Well, no. Story is kind of a stretch for what's happening here. Okay, so... Crisis Core is a series of events you experience through the eyes of Zack Fair, an up-and-coming soldier working for the Shinra Electric Power Company. I say series of events rather than story, partly to be rude, but also because this game is shockingly disjointed. I'd call it picaresque, but it's really not episodic enough for that, instead gliding back and forth between concerns and plot points before finally arriving at its inevitable conclusion. Massive time skips happen with almost no fanfare. Major plot turns land with so little weight that they drift away out of both the game's memory and yours, remaining permanently unresolved. There's an uninterrogated, unutilized incoherence in tone and structure that makes Crisis Core incredibly hard for me to fully unpack. So let's start with the part of the game that basically no one has any bad things to say about: Zack Fair. In sharp contrast to FF7's protagonist, who was a deeply troubled, insecure young man wearing the unconscious facade of a cool anime protagonist, Zack basically just is that cool anime protagonist. Which is appropriate given the plot of Final Fantasy VII, but I think it's notable what a charismatic example of this well-worn cliche Zack is. He's outrageously earnest and endearingly upbeat without it hampering his expressiveness. If you love this game, then I'm willing to bet that this canonical dog boy is a big part of why.
Are you Zack, the puppy?
Don't you just hate it when your boyfriend's mum can immediately tell that you're the bottom? Not that's ever happened to me, and how do I stop recording? Unfortunately, the other characters generally don't fare nearly as well. If they aren't there mostly to make you Leo point at your PlayStation P, they are in turns undeveloped and baffling, victims of the game's endlessly problematic sense of structure. Maybe I'd care more about characters like Cisne if we got time to talk to her instead of whacking this tank in the back for a solid hour. But as it stands, this cast feels absent, more impressions than people, all framed with a bizarre lack of critique, given that most of them are employees for one of the most iconic evil corporations in fiction. And don't worry, we are getting to that. The one relationship I do like is between Zack and this delightful little guy, Cloud Strife. For as little screen time as it gets, their friendship does feel true, mostly because they have a natural, easy rapport that Zack just doesn't have with pretty much any other character in the game. The two have a genuinely strong chemistry, just like in all the doujins I've read, and the game comes alive when these two are on screen together. Everyone else Zack hangs out with is bored, aloof, or bored and aloof, so it's refreshing to see two actual human beings just talk to each other. I'd play a whole game of this. This is the beating romantic heart at the core of this game, or at least it should be. Instead, the romance the game actually tries to present is this.
Sorry, I'm not normal.
How's that?
Yeah, I mean, it's sizzling. The romantic tension here is just absolutely electrifying. 2 whole watts of electricity. Yes, this game dives into what FF7 only hinted at, the romance between Aerith and Zack. Unfortunately, this is the compilation's Aerith, who is functionally a completely different character from the original, a result of pop culture remembering Aerith as a borderline fetishized image of a demure shrine maiden rather than the delightful extroverted doofus she was in the original game. While not quite as soulless as her Advent Children or Kingdom Hearts portrayals, a lot of what makes Aerith fun has been sanded away here, and what's left is mostly just an object for Zack to mythologize in the endgame, rather than an actual character. One whose romance with Zack is so utterly devoid of chemistry as to never really move a step beyond awkward first date conversations between two people who are never ever going on a second date, despite the fact that we're supposed to believe that these two have been together for months or even years. I appreciate that Crisis Core does try to retain some of what made Aerith fun from the original, but she's scarcely less objectified than she is in other Final Fantasy VII compilation media, rendered once again into a person-shaped object for Zack to romanticize, whilst being siloed away from basically every other character and plot point in the game. If significant members of the cast like this are so marginalized, so pushed to the periphery, then who is left? Who is Crisis Core actually about?
Infinite in mystery is the gift of the goddess. We seek it thus, and take to the sky. Ripples form on the water's surface. The wandering soul knows no rest.
Loveless, Act 1.
You remembered.
How can I not, when you've beaten it into my head?
If you've seen footage of Crisis Core that wasn't from a meme, there's a very good chance that it's this scene right here. A really cool anime sword fight that reminds you why you've watched Advent Children a half dozen times despite claiming not to like it. This scene was an AMV and best fight scenes ever mainstay when I was a teenager, and yeah, it kicks ass. But what's interesting about it is who is in this sequence. There's Sephiroth, who needs no introduction as my husband, but also the two new soldier first classes, Genesis Rhapsodus, professional elephant in the room, and Angeal Holly, who's just happy to be here. You know who isn't here? Well, there's James Joyce, author of seminal works like Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake, and Zack Fair! This scene, and indeed much of the game, is about the breakdown in brotherly bonds between Angeal, Genesis and Sephiroth, as all three men fall to various flavours and shades of darkness. But we aren't playing as them. We barely even know them. Instead, we're playing as, and seeing the story through the eyes of, Zack, who does at least have a close relationship with Angeal, but who doesn't even share a single conversation with Genesis before he turns, and whose relationship with Sephiroth is professional at best. This isn't a flaw in and of itself, but it means that the melodrama the game is trying so hard to wring out of this just doesn't work. This moment here, right before the CGI anime fight, this is the only time in the entire game where any degree of camaraderie between these three is shown, and it lasts about 30 seconds. Without any sense of why these three cared about each other, the good times they once shared, there's no impact when the game strains so hard to try to make us feel the pain of their parting. Their relationship exists entirely in the theoretical, something that can only really be fleshed out in the minds of fandom, and while I'm often sympathetic to moves like this, in this case I find it almost completely uncompelling because, well, these characters just aren't good. Sephiroth is probably the best realised of the three, if only because his consummate professionalism and the moments in which he skirts around Shinra's rules to try to reach out to Genesis and Angeal are effective as part of the dramatic irony of his inevitable fall into being a sicko with a cool theme tune. He's not especially deep, and the game is almost fascinatingly bad at actually integrating the character he is portrayed as here with the character FF7's flashbacks presented him as, but, you know, he almost works. Sort of. A bit. By contrast, Genesis is a real misfire. I've danced around it before, but there's really no avoiding it here. Any affection I might have for Genesis, being a ridiculous sad poetry boy who speaks in the most self-important declarations about everything whilst constantly reading from the worst fake Shakespeare shit in the universe, which on paper sounds like a character I'd adore, is spoiled by him being modelled and voiced by Gact, a visual K-star whose presence I find deeply uncomfortable for a number of reasons that I have linked in the description. It's a real shame too. In the original context of Crisis Core's release, I liked Genesis. He had a Vice the Immaculate quality to me, someone who utterly fails to meet the orthodox standards of what a good or compelling character is, but whose adolescent, unfiltered teenage expression is amplified to apocalyptic stakes by a narrative that always treats him with the utmost self-seriousness. But I just can't look at him without seeing an icon of a deeply toxic culture, one that this game wholeheartedly indulges in by framing him as this ultimate tragic emo heartthrob. And then there's Angeal. Angeal, the only one of these characters made explicitly and exclusively for Crisis Core. Angeal, Zack's mentor and maybe the actual true love of his life, platonically or otherwise. Angeal, the actual original wielder of the Buster Sword, and the worst character in this game. I mentioned before that Aerith suffered from being fetishized as a pure maiden, but she has nothing on this motherfucker. Angeal has nothing to him other than being a shockingly overbearing, idealized depiction of a warrior or a soldier. Someone held up as an exemplar of the kind of hero Zack longs to be, honourable to a cartoonish extent. It is through Angeal that the game expresses the themes that make me truly unable to stomach Crisis Core. The honour of a soldier is the element that runs through the entirety of this game. Honour is what separates Angeal from Genesis. Honour is what makes Angeal's wing white, while Genesis and Sephiroth's wings are stained black. When Angeal speaks about dreams and honour, the game believes it with every fibre of its being, with a positively overbearing earnestness. Never mind that the game never really elaborates on what honour means in this context, other than being a good person, I guess. All you need to know is in Angeal. And everything Zack ever wants to be, all the dreams the game treats with so much sincerity, is in Angeal. He is what it means to be a soldier, and being a soldier is good. It's great. It is an ideal to strive towards. It is true, unabashed heroism, even while bad actors like Genesis and Sephiroth sully soldiers' good name, and I hate it. It is offensive to me. I loathe it with a fire I have scarcely felt for a single work of fiction. In 2007, employees of Blackwater A private security firm under direct contract from the US government opened fire on civilians in Baghdad, killing 17 innocent, unarmed people and injuring 20 more while on a mission for the US Army. After 5 investigations over 7 years, eventually neither Blackwater nor the US were found to be at fault. Instead, 4 Blackwater employees were singled out, tried, and convicted in an American federal court for perpetrating what would come to be known as the Nisour Square Massacre. Only one of these 4 was convicted of murder, the other 3 of manslaughter. All 4 were later pardoned in 2020. Pinkerton is a private security firm that was under direct contract by the US government until 1893 and has been hired by a huge number of corporations in the over 170 years it has been in operation. The bread and butter of the Pinkertons after the US Civil War was violent and seditious operations against labor unions across the United States, as they were hired time and time again to infiltrate and disrupt unions, intimidate workers, and violently end protests and strikes. In 1892, 300 Pinkertons were hired to break up a Carnegie steel strike, a violent act of union busting that resulted in the deaths of 16 men. The response of the state government of Pennsylvania was swift. The government forces decided to work with the Pinkertons to break the strike and force the workers back to the mill. And they're still here. Pinkertons have been hired to violently undermine unionization efforts by companies like Amazon, Starbucks, and even Wizards of the fucking Coast to repossess trading cards. This is what a soldier is. This is the legacy of the Buster Sword. This is the honor of a soldier. I have no interest in sugarcoating, making excuses, or dancing around what this obviously is. Soldier in Final Fantasy VII is a paramilitary organization owned and controlled by a corporation who primarily operates in what is a metaphor for oil drilling and electric power. A soldier is not a hero. They are Pinkertons, Blackwater troops, mercenaries. These are the images that Final Fantasy VII consciously and directly evokes, and these are the consequences of how those images are used. Final Fantasy VII understood that Shinra was evil. There was no illusion that they were anything other than the bad guys. From top to bottom, the game was absolutely uncompromising in its perspective that Shinra and everything it represented was a problem, a signifier of all of humanity's mistakes so heavy that the planet itself rages in response to their existence. There was a modicum of sympathy for certain individuals within Shinra, but always in such a way that kinda left them the butt of the joke, that never really absolved them of their participation in the destruction of the planet. Shinra is the great sin of humanity entire, and allowing them to exist is a crime all of humanity is complicit in, which is why FF7's ambiguous ending is so shockingly effective even after all this time. Crisis Core's perspective on Shinra is different. And that, in and of itself, isn't necessarily a bad thing. In making a game about Zack, a fantasy Pinkerton, inevitably, the fact that acting in the interests of a malevolent oil corporation is his entire job description would affect how the story is told. Someone like that is going to see Shinra and its staff in a different way from the terrorists trying to blow it all up for the sake of the world, and exploring that perspective could be really interesting. But one of the most striking things about Crisis Core is just how much it doesn't do this. Shinra is depicted in a much more sympathetic manner than Final Fantasy VII, sure, but there's no use of dramatic irony here. Nothing that clues us into what about Zack's perspective makes him see Shinra in this way. Aside from the contextless invasion of Wutai in the game's first chapter, you never do anything even remotely morally ambiguous throughout the entire game. You spend almost all of it fighting against the forces of Genesis and his army of clones, within whom there is no critique of Shinra itself. No, instead, Crisis Core seems to earnestly believe that Shinra is not that bad, that it's not really the company, the system that Shinra represents, that is the real problem. It's just all those bad apples at the top that ruin it for everyone else. Every criticism that might be leveled at the company is instead pointed towards specific individuals within it, at Hollander or Hojo or even Genesis. The sense of Shinra in Crisis Core is not that you are fighting for an organization that is destroying the world to make a gill, it's that this is a value-neutral environment where good people strive to do good things and bad people do shitty things. It is, shockingly, an earnestly redemptive read on the Shinra Electric Power Company. And it's just the very definition of a 2000s neoliberal nightmare. While it would be a mistake, I think, to characterize Final Fantasy VII as a completely coherent anti-capitalist work, given some backpedaling from the necessity of Avalanche's actions as it reaches its climax, the outrageous capitalist apologia happening in Crisis Core is just truly beyond the pale. And even this, in a skilled enough hand, an aware enough hand, it could have worked. A Crisis Core that understood the ideas and images it was playing with, that used its ideas to play with irony and dissonance, could have knocked it out of the park. I think I would have earnestly loved a game that actually understood that the honor of a soldier is nothing more than a self-evidently ridiculous bit of self-serving propaganda that exists to cover up and justify the morally reprehensible work that is inherent to the job of working for Shinra, something that people like Zack either believe in with total gullibility and earnestness, or as a lie they strain to tell themselves to keep the guilt at bay. But no, Crisis Core doesn't understand. It tees up a perfect hole-in-one shot and just completely whiffs. When Crisis Core talks about the honor of a soldier, it does so with the earnestness and passion of a true and honest believer. It genuinely invests in the honor of being a rent-a-cop for British Petroleum. It thinks that this is both real and an aspirational quality. And I'm sorry, it's just fucking ridiculous. I refuse to accept it. In our world and theirs, there is no honor in being a soldier. They have no dreams to embrace, for there is no imagination at the neoliberal end of history. Only the sounds of boots on the heads of all those who reject the status quo, crushing everyone into the same shape, the shape of a hero. Final Fantasy VII, originally released in 1997 for the PlayStation, stars Cloud Strife, a former member of a paramilitary outfit controlled by the world's Ultra Megacorp, the Shinra Electric Power Company, fighting alongside terrorist cell Avalanche against Shinra, their twisted progeny, and his own inner demons. He's distant, rude, insincere, and he means an awful lot to me. There are a lot of reasons for this. He rides a motorbike, he's got spiky hair, he has a cool outfit, he has 2 cool outfits, he has 3 cool outfits. But the biggest reason I like Cloud Strife is just how resonant, powerful, and beautifully incomplete his arc was in Final Fantasy VII. There are a lot of characters in video games with a case of mistaken identity, but none are quite so well realized as Cloud's, because he's never really handed any easy answers, any concreteness. In fact, arguably, the culmination of his arc is his rejection of answers at all. He learns that he is not the person he believed himself to be, not an ex-soldier first class, not a hero, but a troubled boy attempting to emulate and become Zack Fair, a man who actually was a soldier. But the answer to whether he is the real Clyde, whether there even is a real Clyde, the answers to who he is and who he can be are never 100% given intentionally. By the end of Final Fantasy VII, Clyde is still on that journey to find out who he is. Maybe he'll never know, but that's okay. Clyde learns that he doesn't have to know exactly who he is. He doesn't have to be like Sephiroth, who, when faced with questions about his own identity, immediately accepted the incorrect answer that was handed to him, that he was the descendant of an ancient civilization destined to rule the planet, and, as a result, he became completely subsumed into an alien from space that hollows out his form and wears his face. Clyde doesn't have to be Zack, who never thought for a second about any of the lies Shinra fed him until they gunned him down. He just has to be Clyde, and for as long as it takes for him to find out what that means, he'll be on his way. He'll be moseying along. I think it's really, really important that the game has this parallel between Sephiroth and Zack, that fundamentally the role Zack plays to Clyde is a direct mirror and parallel with the role Jenova, an alien parasite bent on harvesting all life and piloting the empty planet to its next meal, plays to Sephiroth. Zack is a parasite stuck in Clyde's head that feeds on who he is and pilots his body towards inevitable destruction. Zack is, well, I don't necessarily want to say he's a bad person, but as good as he was to Clyde, I don't think he is good for Clyde. I'm not sure he was good for anyone. If you look back at his scant scenes in FF7, it's easy to read Zack as not being all that great of a guy. Sure, he was definitely more of an idealized hero figure than Clyde was, but so was Sephiroth. He was the legendary hero of Final Fantasy VII's world. What does it mean to be a hero for an organization as evil as Shinra, according to Final Fantasy VII? Well, it means this. And what does it mean to be a hero for Shinra, according to Crisis Core? It means honor. It means nobility. It means friendship. It means love. It means speeches about these things. It means manly sacrifice. It means all the things classical wisdom says it means, without an ounce of the criticism and thoughtfulness of its forebear. For every question Final Fantasy VII asked, for every word it spoke, for every uncertain idea it pushed forward, Crisis Core plugs its fingers in its ears and sings the stars and stripes forever. It is so in love with its characters, so in love with Zack, and that love blinds it to all the things it could say, all the things it is saying without realizing, and there's no better demonstration of that than how the game ends. What was striking about Zack's death in Final Fantasy VII was how quiet it was. No music, barely any words. Zack is just caught by Shinra troops and shot while checking on Clyde. It's shocking, it's violent, and it's one of the best scenes in the game. There's a real power to its silence, and ambiguity that holds so many complicated emotions within it. In Crisis Core, it's basically the exact opposite. Zack stands heroically before a legion of Shinra soldiers and helicopters, once more gives a speech about dreams and honor, and charges off to meet his destiny, while the game's theme song plays. As he fights wave after wave, the DMW slowly breaks down as his life and loved ones flash before his eyes in a genuinely striking and effective sequence. It is pure melodrama, and I don't necessarily mean that as a negative. This is Final Fantasy. Melodrama is kind of why we're here. But there is no ambiguity here, and certainly no silence. It is every emotion screamed to the heavens at once. The passing of a great hero, a great man, a man this game loves, wholeheartedly and completely, in a way Final Fantasy VII never did. And, of course, unlike in the original, where Cloud picks up the Buster Sword of his own accord, here it is pushed upon him, inflicted upon him by Zack himself, passing on the burden of being the living legacy of Zack and Angeal, two honourable soldiers the game thinks are so straightforwardly heroic that they are worthy of nothing less than heaven. In eulogizing Zack, in deifying Angeal, in making the legacy of the Buster Sword something to be proud of, something to cling to, rather than a burden on Cloud that he must lay down to move on, it does him a disservice. It does Final Fantasy VII a disservice. To present, as this game does, the idea that embodying Zack is something good, and Cloud carrying on this living legacy is something he should be honoured to do, it so completely spits in the eye of all the things I find most resonant about Final Fantasy VII. For the sake of Angeal, a character who is boring on his own and whose inescapable gravity swallows every capability of Crisis Core to do or say anything interesting at all, both as something with the name Final Fantasy VII attached to it and its own story. This is the moment Crisis Core becomes a complete unsalvageable failure to me. As a melodramatic, silly, romantic epic, it fails because the characters apart from Zack are so flat. As a portrayal of the life of an unknowing stooge of corporate evil, it's a catastrophic misfire. And as a work that exists in the wider context of the War on Terror, its use of imagery is so careless as to be shocking. This is a deeply, deeply beloved ending. It's pretty much universally regarded as the game's highlight. And I do think it's presented well, but it just brings every single problem I have with what this game is doing narratively home to roost. It's the inevitable car crash at the end of a bumpy ride in a broken car. Spectacular and climactic, but leaving everything that actually matters bleeding out in the wreckage. Zack closes this game by addressing the player directly, asking if he has become a hero. It's an earnest question, both from him and the game itself, a plea for recognition, asking us, did it do good? And you know what, Zack? You did. You became a Final Fantasy VII hero. You know, as hard as it may be to believe, Urgai's God Bless the Ring isn't considered a very good fighting game. In the original context of its release, in the fading days of the PS1's primacy, while Tekken 3 and Soul Calibur ruled the world, Urgai's unconventional controls and bizarre alternate modes left little impression, and over time, that impression has hardened around Urgai's, forming a new context around it, that of its status as a laughingstock. The thing is though, I kinda like it. The controls take a lot of getting used to, and it's hideously unbalanced, but it's smooth enough and gorgeous enough to make a quick run through its arcade mode a comfortably fun proposition, and quest mode is just hilarious. Divorced from its original release, and found in a new renaissance of appreciation for the PS1 as a distinct cultural aesthetic, Urgai's has finally found its rhythm in a way. No less a bizarre object, but one that, depending on where you stand, looks a little different from each alternate angle. It's this idea, the idea of a game acquiring new shapes and forms as the cultural detritus of the times in which it is played cling to it, that I come back to time and time again when I think about Crisis Core. Its strange gameplay and structure were defined by the context the PSP placed around it, while my own building discomfort with its handling of Soldier and the legacy of the Buster Sword created my own context that cannot help but colour how I see the game. I know many people who don't have that context, and that allows them to see Crisis Core in different, better, brighter ways. And this video is not about taking that away from people, not about telling those people that they're wrong. It's about how Crisis Core, about how all games, all media, are like light refracted through an ever-changing prism, splitting into different colours that different people see. Crisis Core may make me see red, but that's hardly the only thing it can be. Just like Eyes and its unexpected primacy of Zack and Vincent shaped the context Final Fantasy VII was perceived in, so too did Crisis Core, because so many people saw something special in it. It has contributed to the creation of this second Phantom Final Fantasy VII that exists only in the public consciousness, a game with all the iconography but none of the intent behind it, where everything about it is aestheticized. Why else do they all have one wing? Sephiroth never had that. It was just the name of a song. Final Fantasy VII has remained the same, but the world around it hasn't. And its changes, along with ours, have in turn changed how we perceive Final Fantasy VII. Its stylistically divergent progeny, each one affected by the time and place of its release, and the subsequent reaction to it, shine a light so bright that it makes Final Fantasy VII itself difficult to see. When I first played Final Fantasy VII, in the mid-2000s, after I had already seen Final Fantasy VII through the lens of Kingdom Hearts, Advent Children, Last Order, and countless interpretations online, I found a game that both was and was not what I was expecting. The famous stuff was there, but also so much stuff that I had never expected to find. Things that hit me so much harder than the things I was told to expect, to appreciate and enjoy. Cloud's relationship with his identity, the little moments of comedy and charm and fun that were so apart from the self-serious tone of everything I had seen online, it is a game that has so much to offer, more than an Advent Children AMV, as cool as it might be, could show you. But I don't say this to condemn. For my sins, I do enjoy the compilation of Final Fantasy VII as an aesthetic object. I still like Dirge of Cerberus. I'll complain about Advent Children all day long, but I'll still watch it if you ask me, and in fits and bursts. Even though it is the low point of the compilation for me, there's still a little space in my heart for Crisis Core, especially now that it doesn't play like total ass. But the compilation is not Final Fantasy VII. It is something different, and I would like Final Fantasy VII and the compilation of Final Fantasy VII to succeed or fail, to be appreciated or dismissed, to be loved on their own terms, not on the twisted shadows they cast on the world around them. And that's how I'd like to hold Crisis Core in my heart. To stand by every criticism I made, to ultimately not like the game on the whole, but to still find something in it for being this totally bizarre, totally weird cultural artifact of the late 2000s. Its over-earnest world of one-winged angels and forum signatures, of flip phones and names like Genesis Rhapsodus, of the PSP animations still lovingly preserved even on PS5. Why is Crisis Core so weird? Because of all of this. Every cultural moment that has clung to it throughout its development and existence, preserved like amber inside the story of a himbo troop eating shit. For better or for worse, Crisis Core is part of our history, part of my history, and all of its weirdness is why I'd like to remember it in this new appreciative context, even while I leave it behind. The compilation of Final Fantasy VII is a messy, busted old car wreck of a mini-franchise, rusting and aging in ways sometimes gracefully and often not. But occasionally, I'll look back over my shoulder at it, and the light will catch it in a way that, however briefly, makes me smile. Final Fantasy VII remains, on its disc, waiting to be played, and found anew all over again, for as long as there are people who can. Nothing can harm it nor alter it, not truly, not Genesis Rhapsodus, not Angeal Holly, not Weiss the Immaculate, and certainly not Zack Fair. Right?
We're still here at the scene of this terrible disaster, caused by a massive tornado which swept through sectors 0, 1, and 2. Amidst the wreckage of the expressway, search and rescue operations are already in progress.
let us defy destiny. Together. Cloud, there's still so much to be done.